Talia was 14 years old when her mother was tragically killed, and no one was held accountable for her demise. She was placed in the custody of the state, where she waited in foster care to be adopted. After only 7 months, she was finally told she was being adopted by a loving family who had one 17-year-old daughter. Excited to have parents and a big sister, Talia woke early that morning, eager to meet her new family. When James and Victoria walked into the foster care center, Talia's heart skipped a beat. She watched them approach, her pulse quickening with anticipation. They looked warm and gentle, with kind expressions that softened her nervousness. Victoria immediately extended her arms for a hug, her voice soothing as she greeted Talia, while James offered a reassuring smile. Standing just behind them was Regina, her new sister, who gave Talia an encouraging grin that made her feel a little more at ease. In that moment, Talia's excitement grew, and she felt like she might truly belong with them. Talia stared out the car window, watching the familiar streets of her childhood zip by. The butterflies in her stomach fluttered with a mix of excitement and trepidation. After 7 long months in the foster care system, she was finally being adopted. Her social worker had assured her that James and Victoria were a loving, affluent couple, eager to provide her with a stable, nurturing home. As the car pulled up to a grand gated mansion, Talia's eyes widened. This was a far cry from the modest group homes and cramped apartments she was used to. She gripped the worn backpack in her lap, the only possessions she had to her name. "Welcome home, Talia," James said with a warm smile, opening the car door for her. "We're so happy to have you join our family." Talia stepped out hesitantly, taking in the meticulously manicured lawn and the imposing facade of the house. Victoria appeared at the doorway, her face alight with joy. "There's our girl!" she exclaimed, rushing forward to envelop Talia in a tight hug. "We've been waiting for you. Come, let me show you around." Talia allowed herself to be led inside, her senses overwhelmed by the sheer opulence of the home. Gleaming marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and plush furnishings, it was a far cry from the utilitarian group homes she was used to. "This is the living room, and over here is the dining room," Victoria said, guiding Talia through the expansive rooms. "And just wait until you see your bedroom. We've decorated it just for you." As they climbed the grand staircase, Talia couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The house was beautiful, but it also felt impersonal, like a museum rather than a home. She wondered if she would ever truly belong in this opulent world. Victoria pushed open a door, revealing a spacious bedroom decorated in soft pastels and delicate floral patterns. "What do you think?" she asked, eagerness evident in her voice. Talia stepped inside, running her fingers over the silky bedspread. It's lovely," she said, forcing a smile. "Thank you." "We want you to feel comfortable and at home here," James said, placing a hand on Talia's shoulder. "This is your room now, and we're so excited to have you as part of our family." Talia nodded, but a nagging feeling of unease lingered. Something about the way her new parents looked at her, the intensity of their affection, made her wonder if there was more to their eagerness to adopt her. Over the next few weeks, Talia settled into her new routine. James and Victoria doted on her, showering her with gifts and attention. They enrolled her in a prestigious private school and took her on extravagant outings, determined to give her the life they believed she deserved. However, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that their affection was tinged with something else, an almost obsessive need to keep her close, to monitor her every move. The frequent doctor appointments and medical tests only heightened her suspicions. "Is everything okay?" she asked one day, as Victoria drove her to yet another checkup. "Why do I need so many tests?" Victoria's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and her brow furrowed. "It's just routine, dear," she said, her voice strained. "Your health is our top priority." Talia fell silent, watching the city streets blur past. She couldn't shake the feeling that her new parents were hiding something from her, something that went beyond the typical concerns of adoptive parents. As the car pulled up to the hospital, Talia steeled herself for another round of poking and prodding. But this time, as she sat in the sterile examination room, she couldn't help but overhear a conversation outside the door. "The tests look promising," a man's voice said. "She's a perfect match for Regina's transplant." Talia's heart pounded in her chest. Transplant? Perfect match? She pressed her ear against the door, straining to hear more. "Excellent," a woman's voice replied. Victoria's. "We'll schedule the surgery as soon as possible. Keep this between us, no one will ever know the truth." Talia's breath caught in her throat as she pondered silently. Who could her adoptive parents be talking about? And why hadn't she known that her older adoptive sister, Regina, was sick? Did they find a donor organ for her? What was really going on? She began to tread carefully, listening in on every private conversation her parents had, hoping to piece together the truth. A part of her wanted to confront them, to ask directly about what was wrong with Regina, especially since she had grown so fond of her older sister. But the fact that they hadn't told her anything made Talia hesitate. Did they not want her to worry? Or, worse, did they not see her as family enough to share such critical news? No matter, she decided, steeling herself. I'll just stay vigilant and keep listening. I'll find out what's going on. As the initial excitement of her new home began to fade, Talia found herself increasingly unsettled by the subtle shifts in her adoptive parents' behavior. James and Victoria, who had presented themselves as loving and attentive, now seemed consumed by an almost obsessive focus on her health and well-being. The frequent doctor appointments, the constant monitoring, and the hushed conversations that would abruptly end whenever she entered the room, all of it served to heighten her unease. Talia couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to their actions, something they were desperately trying to hide. One evening, as she was passing by the study, Talia heard the muffled voices of her adoptive parents. Curiosity got the better of her, and she inched closer, straining to make out their words. "The tests came back, and the results are promising," Victoria said, her tone laced with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Talia is a perfect match for Regina's transplant." And there it was, clear as day. Talia's heart pounded as she pieced it all together. Her adoptive parents' intentions laid bare. They planned to harvest her organs illegally to save their precious biological daughter. The conversation she'd overheard months ago wasn't about searching for a donor match through a legal list. It was about her. Every doctor's appointment, every test, it wasn't for her well-being or out of some deep concern that she might fall ill like Regina. It was a carefully disguised evaluation, making sure she was the ideal candidate. Suddenly, the extra precautions made sense. The emphasis on a balanced diet, drinking enough water, getting ample sleep, following every little health directive. They hadn't done it out of love. No, it was to keep her body in peak condition, ensuring her organs would be fit for harvesting to save their real daughter. A cold chill crept over her as the painful realization sank in. They hadn't adopted her out of love. They had adopted her to save their own. Talia's heart raced as she processed the implications of those words. Her adoptive parents were discussing a transplant, and she was the intended donor. The realization hit her like a physical blow, shattering the illusion of a loving, supportive family she had so desperately clung to. "Excellent," James replied, his voice low and calculating. "We'll schedule the surgery as soon as possible. With Talia as the donor, Regina's chances of survival are excellent." Talia's hands trembled as she backed away from the study, her mind racing. She had to get out of this house, away from these people who had so callously viewed her as a means to an end. The thought of her organs being taken without her consent filled her with a sense of violated betrayal. In the privacy of her room, Talia allowed the tears to flow freely. She had hoped, against all odds, that this time would be different, that she had finally found the family she had always longed for. But the truth was far more sinister, and she was powerless to stop it. As the days passed, Talia found herself increasingly withdrawn, her interactions with James and Victoria laced with a wary suspicion. She observed their behavior more closely, noting the subtle glances and the hushed conversations that seemed to revolve around her health and well-being. The once warm home now felt like a gilded cage, a place where her very existence was a commodity to be exploited. Talia found solace in the few moments of solitude she could steal, where she could reflect on her situation and plan her next move. One night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, Talia's mind drifted to her biological mother. What would she have thought of this twisted situation? Would she have been able to protect Talia from this fate? The ache of her mother's absence, compounded by the betrayal she now faced, threatened to consume her. Talia knew she had to find a way to escape, to uncover the truth and seek justice for herself and her mother. But the weight of her circumstances, the fear of the unknown, and the lingering hope that her adoptive parents might still love her in some twisted way kept her rooted in place, paralyzed by indecision. As the days turned into weeks, Talia's resolve slowly began to harden. She would not allow herself to be a pawn in her adoptive parents' sinister plans. She would fight, no matter the cost, to reclaim her freedom and her identity. With a newfound determination, Talia began to plan her escape, knowing that the moment of confrontation was drawing ever closer. Talia's heart raced as she stared at the incriminating documents sprawled across her adoptive parents' desk. The medical files detailed her compatibility with organ donation, shattering the illusion of a loving family she had so desperately clung to. Hands trembling, she flipped through the pages, her mind reeling with the implications. The tests, the constant monitoring, the obsession over her health, it all made sense now. James and Victoria weren't just concerned parents. They were orchestrating a sinister plan to use her as a living donor for their biological daughter, Regina. Talia's breath caught in her throat as she recalled the hushed conversations she had overheard, the veiled references to a special child. She had dismissed them as mere paranoia, but now the truth was undeniable. Her adoptive parents had never truly seen her as a daughter. She was merely a means to an end, a vessel for their daughter's salvation. Tears stung her eyes as the weight of the betrayal crashed down upon her. She had been so eager to belong, to finally have a family that cared for her. But the reality was far more twisted. Her new home had become a gilded cage, and her adoptive parents were the jailers. Talia closed the file, her hands trembling. She needed to confront them, to demand the truth. Steeling herself, she made her way downstairs, where James and Victoria sat in the living room, sipping their afternoon tea. "We need to talk," Talia said, her voice quivering with a mix of fear and determination. James and Victoria exchanged a brief glance, their expressions unreadable. "Of course, dear," Victoria replied, her tone sickeningly sweet. "What's on your mind?" Talia took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the file tightly. "I found the medical records in your study. I know what you're planning to do with me." The air in the room seemed to still as Talia's words hung in the silence. James cleared his throat, a thin veneer of concern masking the underlying tension. "Talia, we don't know what you're talking about. Those records are simply part of your routine medical care." "Don't lie to me," Talia exclaimed, her voice rising. "I know the truth. You adopted me because I'm a match for Regina's transplant. You're going to take my organs without my consent." Victoria's eyes widened, and she reached out a hand as if to placate Talia. "Darling, you have to understand, this is for Regina's sake. She needs those organs, and you're the perfect match." "It's a gift you can give to your sister." Talia recoiled, her grip on the file tightening. "I am not your daughter, and Regina is not my sister. You're monsters using me for your own selfish needs. I won't let you do this." James stood, his brow furrowed. "Talia, you're being irrational. This is a medical necessity, and as your parents, we're making the best decision for our family." "Your family?" Talia scoffed, the anger and betrayal bubbling to the surface. "You've never seen me as part of this family. I'm just a commodity to you, a means to an end. Well, I won't be a part of your twisted scheme. I'm leaving, and you'll never find me." Without another word, Talia turned and fled the room, the file clutched tightly to her chest. She raced up the stairs, her mind racing with a million thoughts. She had to get out of this house, away from these people who had so callously betrayed her trust. Talia quickly packed a small bag, shoving in a few changes of clothes and the meager savings she had managed to accumulate. As she made her way to the front door, she paused, her hand on the knob. She knew that once she left, there was no going back. This would be the end of the life she had hoped for, the family she had so desperately wanted. With a deep breath, she turned the knob and stepped out, but was captured by James, determined to escape the nightmare that had become her life. She fought to break free of his grip, but he was too strong, and before she knew it, she woke up in a hospital. The sterile scent of the hospital filled Talia's nostrils as she sat on the edge of the examination table, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent the last few days carefully planning her escape, knowing that time was running out. The moment she had overheard her adoptive parents, James and Victoria, discussing their sinister plans to harvest her organs for their biological daughter, Regina, Talia's world had been shattered. Talia's mind raced as she replayed the conversation in her head. The callous way they had spoken about her, as if she were merely a means to an end, had left her feeling violated and betrayed. She had always known that her adoption had been too good to be true, but she had never imagined the depths of their deception. As the doctor entered the room, Talia forced herself to remain calm, masking the turmoil within. "All right, Talia, let's take a look at those blood test results," the doctor said, his voice laced with a false warmth. Talia nodded, her eyes scanning the room for any opportunity to make her escape. The door was just a few steps away, but she knew that the hallway would be heavily guarded. Her only chance was to wait for the right moment, when the doctor and her adoptive parents were distracted. As the doctor reviewed the results, Talia's gaze drifted to the tray of medical instruments on the counter. Her heart raced as she spotted a scalpel, its sharp blade glinting in the harsh fluorescent light. Talia knew that she would need to act quickly and decisively if she wanted to survive. Suddenly, the door burst open, and James and Victoria strode into the room, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and impatience. "Well, doctor?" James demanded, his eyes narrowing as he fixed his gaze on Talia. "The tests look good," the doctor replied, his tone measured. "We're getting prepped to do the transplant in a few hours." Talia felt her stomach twist with dread. The moment of truth had arrived, and she knew that she had to act now or risk losing her life. As the doctor turned to prepare the surgical instruments, Talia seized the scalpel and, with a swift, determined motion, slashed at the IV line attached to her arm. The room erupted into chaos as the doctor and her adoptive parents rushed to restrain her. Talia fought back with every ounce of strength she possessed, her adrenaline fueling her movements. She lashed out with the scalpel, slicing at the hands that tried to hold her down, her survival instinct overriding any sense of fear. In the midst of the struggle, Talia caught a glimpse of Regina, her adoptive sister, standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and confusion. Talia's heart sank, realizing that Regina might be as much a victim in this twisted scheme as she was. With a final, desperate push, Talia managed to break free from the grasp of her captors and dashed towards the door. She could hear the pounding of footsteps behind her as she ran down the hallway, the sound of her own ragged breathing echoing in her ears. Talia's mind raced as she navigated the maze of the hospital, her only goal to escape before her adoptive parents could catch up to her. She ducked into stairwells, darted through empty corridors, and even hid in a supply closet, her heart pounding in her chest as she listened for any sign of pursuit. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Talia burst out of the hospital's main entrance, the bright sunlight momentarily blinding her. She didn't stop running, her legs pumping as she fled down the crowded city streets, weaving through the throngs of pedestrians. Talia didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she couldn't stop. She had to put as much distance between herself and her adoptive parents as possible. The thought of what they had planned for her, the idea of being used as a mere organ donor, filled her with a sense of revulsion and fear. As she ran, Talia's mind raced, trying to make sense of the events that had led her to this moment. How could her adoptive parents, the people who were supposed to love and protect her, have betrayed her in such a horrific way? And what of Regina, her adoptive sister? Was she truly complicit in their plans, or was she also a victim? Talia knew that she couldn't run forever, that eventually she would have to confront her past and seek justice. But for now, all she could focus on was survival, on putting as much distance between herself and the hospital as possible. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached, driven by a single desperate need: to escape the nightmare that had become her life. For the next decade, Talia's life was a constant battle for survival and self-preservation. After her harrowing escape from the hospital, she knew she could never return to the life she once knew. The betrayal she had experienced at the hands of her adoptive parents had shattered any sense of security or belonging she had once felt. Talia spent the first few months in a state of perpetual fear, constantly looking over her shoulder, terrified that James and Victoria would track her down. She moved from one anonymous motel to the next, always keeping a low profile and avoiding any situation that could potentially expose her. The trauma of her ordeal had left her emotionally and physically exhausted, but the instinct for self-preservation kept her moving forward. As the months turned into years, Talia slowly began to regain her strength and sense of purpose. She knew that if she was to have any chance of uncovering the truth and seeking justice, she would need to become stronger, both physically and mentally. Talia enrolled in self-defense classes, honing her skills and building up her confidence. She also immersed herself in research, delving into the world of organ donation, the foster care system, and the legal intricacies that could help her build a case against her adoptive parents. Talia's days were filled with a relentless pursuit of information as she pieced together the events that had led to her mother's death and her own harrowing experience. She scoured old newspaper archives, court records, and medical journals, searching for any shred of evidence that could support her case. The more she uncovered, the more her determination grew, fueled by a burning desire for justice and a need to understand the full extent of her adoptive parents' deception. In the quiet moments, when the weight of her past threatened to overwhelm her, Talia would reflect on the life she had lost, the chance to have a loving family, to feel safe and secure. The memories of her mother's warm embrace and the laughter they had shared haunted her, a constant reminder of the innocence she had been robbed of. Yet, Talia refused to let these emotions consume her. Instead, she channeled them into a fierce resolve to ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate. As the years passed, Talia's skills and knowledge grew, and she began to formulate a plan to confront her adoptive parents. She knew that the road ahead would be treacherous, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but the thought of finally facing those who had betrayed her drove her forward. Talia began to reach out to private investigators and legal experts, carefully building a network of allies who could assist her in her quest for justice. The decision to return to her hometown and confront her past was not an easy one. Talia grappled with the emotional turmoil it would bring, the resurfacing of painful memories, and the potential consequences of her actions. Yet, she knew that she could not move forward with her life until she had faced the demons of her past. With a mix of trepidation and determination, Talia began to lay the groundwork for her return, meticulously planning each step to ensure that she would be prepared for whatever lay ahead. As Talia stood on the precipice of her confrontation, she couldn't help but wonder about the role of her adoptive sister, Regina. Had she been aware of her parents' sinister plans, or was she too a victim of their manipulation? The uncertainty surrounding Regina's involvement only added to the complexity of the situation, and Talia knew that she would need to tread carefully if she were to uncover the full truth. With a deep breath, Talia steeled herself for the challenges that lay ahead. She had spent years in the shadows, honing her skills and fortifying her resolve. Now, the time had come to step back into the light and confront the past, no matter the cost. Talia was ready to fight for the justice she so desperately sought, and she would stop at nothing to ensure that her adoptive parents and their accomplices were held accountable for their crimes. Talia stood outside the familiar townhouse, her heart pounding with a mixture of trepidation and determination. It had been a decade since she had last set foot in this place, a lifetime of shadows and survival. But now, armed with newfound strength and purpose, she was ready to confront the demons of her past. As she approached the ornate door, Talia steeled herself, recalling the years of painstaking research and preparation that had led her to this moment. She had spent countless hours poring over medical records, news clippings, and private investigator reports, piecing together the intricate web of deceit that had ensnared her. With a deep breath, Talia rang the bell, her fingers trembling slightly. The door swung open, revealing the familiar face of her adoptive father, James. His expression shifted from surprise to a forced smile, the lines on his face betraying the years that had passed. "Talia," he said, his voice laced with a hint of discomfort. "What a pleasant surprise. Please come in." Talia stepped into the foyer, her eyes sweeping over the opulent surroundings that had once been her gilded cage. The lavish furnishings and gleaming surfaces felt like a facade, masking the dark secrets that lurked beneath. "I'm not here for a social visit, James," Talia said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I've come to confront you and Victoria about what you did to me and my mother." James's expression hardened, and he ushered Talia into the living room, closing the door behind them. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone dripping with feigned innocence. Talia's eyes narrowed, and she reached into her bag, pulling out a thick file. "Don't play dumb with me. I've spent years uncovering the truth, and I have the evidence to prove it." She laid the file on the coffee table, its contents spilling out: medical records, police reports, and witness statements. "You and Victoria planned to use me as an organ donor for Regina, didn't you? And when my mother tried to stop you, you had her killed. And don't worry, I didn't come alone. A copy of the evidence I have is also with someone else, so if anything happens to me, everything will be released to the press. So don't get any funny ideas. I know exactly how deadly you can be, but I came prepared. I know you have money and could buy out anyone you please, but let's see how your wealth saves you once the truth is out. I cannot be bought, so let's not go there." James's face paled, and he opened his mouth to speak, but Talia cut him off. "Don't bother denying it. I know everything. The black market connections, the corrupt doctors, the forged documents. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" Talia's voice trembled with a mix of anger and anguish, the weight of her past experiences bearing down on her. All those years of being a prisoner in this house, subjected to endless tests and procedures, all for the sake of your precious daughter. Well, I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore. James shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "Talia, you have to understand, it was never about hurting you. We just wanted to save Regina's life. Surely you can understand that." Talia let out a bitter laugh. "Understand? You took my mother from me, and you were willing to take my life as well. There's nothing for me to understand, except that your entire family are monsters who uses their wealth and influence to bribe doctors, to illegally test patients for a donor match without consent for your daughter. That is what I understand." The sound of footsteps on the stairs drew their attention, and Talia's heart lurched as she caught sight of Regina, her adoptive sister. The young woman's eyes widened in surprise, and Talia could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to comprehend the confrontation unfolding before her. "Regina," Talia said, her voice laced with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, "were you aware of what your parents were planning?" Regina hesitated, her gaze shifting between Talia and James. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "James and Victoria, I see you found a way to save your beloved daughter after I escaped. But tell me, whose life did you shatter to make it happen? Which innocent person had to be sacrificed to get her those organs? She looks strong and healthy now, but someone else must have suffered for it. Who had to pay the price for your desperation? And how do you live with that knowledge? And Regina, are you content? You got a second chance, but at what cost? Someone else's child or parent paid the ultimate price so you could live. It would have been me, but I managed to escape. I wonder if you'll ever truly feel free, or if the weight of that decision will haunt you forever." Talia's eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer to Regina, her expression hardening. "Don't lie to me, Regina. Were you complicit in their plans to use me as an organ donor?" Regina's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head frantically. "No, I swear, I had no idea about any of this. I thought they were just trying to help me." Talia studied Regina's face, searching for any signs of deception. The anguish and confusion etched on her features seemed genuine, and Talia felt a flicker of empathy for her adoptive sister, who had also been a victim of their parents' machinations. "If that's true, then you're as much a pawn in this as I was," Talia said, her voice softening slightly. "But that doesn't change the fact that your parents are responsible for my mother's death and for the hell they put me through." Regina's shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "I can't believe this. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, Talia." Talia turned her attention back to James, her expression hardening once more. Where's Victoria? I want to hear the truth from both of you. James hesitated, his gaze darting toward the stairs. She's not well. I'm afraid she won't be able to join us. Talia narrowed her eyes, sensing the deception. Don't give me that. I know you're hiding something. Where is she? Before James could respond, the sound of a door opening upstairs drew their attention. Talia's breath caught in her throat as Victoria emerged, her frail frame supported by a walker. The once vibrant woman looked haggard, her eyes sunken and her skin pale. Talia, Victoria whispered, her voice trembling. You've come back. Talia felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, betrayal, and a glimmer of pity. Yes, I've come back to face the truth, Victoria. To make you and James answer for what you've done. Victoria's gaze shifted to the scattered documents on the coffee table, and she let out a shaky sigh. I suppose there's no use denying it anymore. Yes, Talia, it's all true. We needed your organs to save Regina's life. Talia clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. And my mother, what did you do to her? Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and she sank into a nearby chair, the weight of her guilt etched on her features. We didn't mean for it to happen that way. When your mother found out about our plans, she threatened to go to the authorities. We couldn't let that happen. Talia's heart pounded in her ears, the realization of her mother's fate shattering her composure. You killed her. You killed my mother to cover up your own selfish desires. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Victoria's muffled sobs. Talia felt a surge of rage, her vision blurring as she fought to keep her emotions in check. I want justice, Talia said, her voice low and trembling. For my mother, and for what you've done to me. You're going to pay for this, one way or another. As Talia's words echoed through the room, the air was thick with tension, the weight of the past bearing down on them all. The confrontation had only just begun, and the path to justice would be paved with more revelations and difficult choices. The tension in the air was palpable. They stepped into the dimly lit conference room, Talia's gaze fixed on the three figures seated across the table. James and Victoria, her adoptive parents, sat with their biological daughter Regina, all of them wearing expressions that ranged from defiance to thinly veiled panic. Talia had spent the last decade meticulously planning this moment, her thirst for justice burning brighter with each passing year. She had amassed an impressive array of evidence, from medical records to damning witness testimonies, all of which she now laid out before them. How much others were there before me? Talia began, her voice steady and unwavering. The lies, the betrayal, the murder, it all ends here. James leaned forward, his brow furrowed with a look of cold determination. We are still your family, Talia, he said, his tone laced with bitterness. You should feel lucky that we saw you as worthy enough to be our daughter's organ donor. Yet here you are, acting like an ingrate. Do you think your poor mother could have ever given you the life we provided, even in the short time you were here? We've given you a loving home and everything you could ever need, and this is how you repay us? Regina yelled, her voice shaking with disbelief and anger. Dad! Mom! How could you do this? You only adopted Talia to take her organs to save me? You're the reason she's an orphan? I can't believe this. She paused, searching their faces for any sign of remorse. Mom, Dad, say something. Did you hurt someone to get me this new kidney and lung? What have you done? Victoria pleaded, desperation etched on her face. Regina, please, you are our only child. How could we just stand by and watch you die? With all the money we have, you were way down on the organ donor list, and you would have died before you ever got a donor. We did what any loving parents would have done. We did it for you, for your life. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her manicured fingers drumming against the polished table with a calculated rhythm. You've always been a difficult child, Talia. This is just another one of your childish tantrums. She leaned in, her voice dripping with disdain. How dare you judge us and come here to unsettle Regina? You have no idea what we sacrificed for her. Talia's jaw tightened, her grip on the folder in her hands tightening. Childish tantrums? Is that how you justify trying to steal my organs and killing my mother? She paused, her gaze shifting to Regina, who sat silently, her expression a mixture of confusion and apprehension. And you, Regina, Talia continued, were you in on it the whole time? Did you know that your parents were planning to use me as a living donor? Regina's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. No. I had no idea. I swear I didn't know anything about this. I'm just as shocked as you are. Talia studied Regina's face, searching for any signs of deception. She knew that her adoptive sister had been an unwitting pawn in her parents' twisted scheme, but a part of her couldn't help but wonder if Regina had been complicit in some way. Regina, if that's true, then you're as much a victim in all of this as I am, Talia said, her tone softening slightly. But I need to know the truth. Were you aware of their plans? Regina's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head again. No, I swear. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, Talia. I can't even begin to imagine what you've been through. Talia nodded, her gaze returning to her adoptive parents. Well, I'm sure you can imagine, Regina. After all, you were the one who was supposed to benefit from my suffering. James slammed his fist on the table, his face flushed with anger. Enough of this nonsense. Talia, you've always been an ungrateful, troublesome child. We took you in, gave you a home, and this is how you repay us? Repay you? Talia scoffed, her voice laced with contempt. By allowing you to harvest my organs without my consent? By letting you get away with murdering my mother? Victoria's composure cracked and she leaned forward, her eyes wild. We did what we had to do. Regina's life was at stake, and you were the perfect match. We couldn't let her die. Talia shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. That's no excuse. You had no right to make that decision for me. And my mother's life, how can you justify taking that as well? The room fell silent, the weight of Talia's words hanging in the air. She watched as James and Victoria exchanged a glance, their expressions a glimmer of guilt and fear. Your mother was a complication. She got suspicious about the frequency of the tests your pediatrician was ordering and started asking too many questions. You're not a parent, Talia, so you wouldn't understand the pain of watching your only child suffer and being powerless to help them, James said, his voice cold and unyielding. You were Regina's perfect match, her chance at a new life, and your mother was going to jeopardize that. James finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. She discovered our plans and threatened to expose us. We couldn't let that happen. Talia felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The realization that her mother had been murdered because of her own adoptive parents' greed and selfishness. She had known the truth all along, but hearing it spoken aloud was like a punch to the gut. You monsters, Talia spat, her hands trembling. You took everything from me. My mother, my freedom, my very identity. And for what? To save your precious daughter? Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but Talia cut her off, her voice rising in anger. No, don't even try to justify it. There is no excuse for what you've done. You're going to pay for your crimes, all of you. I won't rest until you're behind bars, where you belong. The room erupted into a flurry of activity as Talia's words sank in. James and Victoria protested, while Regina sat in stunned silence, her face pale and her hands trembling. Talia watched it all unfold, a sense of grim satisfaction settling in her chest. This was only the beginning. The confrontation had been the first step in her quest for justice, and she was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The courtroom was a cauldron of tension, the air thick with the weight of years of deception and betrayal. Talia sat in the witness stand, her gaze unwavering as she recounted the harrowing details of her past, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil that threatened to consume her. For so long she had lived in the shadows, haunted by the memories of her adoptive parents' sinister plans. Now, finally, the truth was being laid bare, and Talia found herself at the center of a reckoning that would determine the fate of those who had once claimed to love her. As she spoke, the faces of James and Victoria contorted with a mixture of defiance and desperation. They had once wielded power and influence, manipulating the system to serve their own selfish desires. But now, their carefully constructed facade had crumbled, and they were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. Talia's testimony was a damning indictment of their crimes, painting a vivid picture of the betrayal she had endured. She described the constant medical tests, the obsessive monitoring, and the chilling revelation that she had been nothing more than a means to an end, a living, breathing organ donor for their biological daughter, Regina. As Talia's words echoed through the courtroom, Regina sat in the gallery, her face etched with a mixture of shock and disbelief. The young woman had been oblivious to her parents' sinister plans, her own innocence a testament to the depths of their deception. Talia's gaze briefly met Regina's, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Regina was not the enemy, but a victim of her parents' machinations, just as Talia had been. The realization that her sister had been as much a pawn in this twisted game as she was only served to deepen Talia's resolve. The testimony continued, each detail more harrowing than the last. Talia recounted the night of her attempted escape, the desperate struggle in the hospital, and the years she had spent in hiding, constantly looking over her shoulder, haunted by the fear that her adoptive parents would find her. As the evidence mounted, the prosecution's case grew stronger, and the noose around James and Victoria's necks tightened. The medical records, the testimony of the doctors involved, and the damning revelations about the black market organ trade all painted a picture of a family consumed by greed and a willingness to sacrifice everything, even their own child, to preserve their privileged lifestyle. The final blow came when Talia revealed the truth about her biological mother's death. With a trembling voice, she described the moment she found evidence that her mother was taken out by her adoptive parents because she stood in their way. To which they later confessed, she has everything recorded, they had eliminated the woman who had given birth to her and dared to uncover their sinister plans. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs, the weight of the revelation palpable. James and Victoria's faces drained of color, their carefully constructed lies crumbling around them. In the end, justice was served. The judge's gavel fell, sealing the fate of Talia's adoptive parents, who were sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for illegal organ harvesting and the murder of Talia's mother. The doctors involved in the illegal organ trade were also held accountable, their medical licenses revoked and their reputations tarnished. Talia could finally breathe, knowing that the truth had prevailed and that those who wronged her family would face the consequences of their horrific actions. As Talia stepped out of the courtroom, a sense of relief washed over her. The burden she had carried for so long had been lifted, and yet the scars of her past would never fully heal. The betrayal, the loss, and the shattered dreams of a loving family would forever be etched into her psyche. But in the aftermath of the trial, Talia found herself drawn to Regina, the sister she had once feared. The young woman, now free from the shadow of her parents' manipulations, reached out to Talia, offering a tentative hand of friendship and understanding. Together, they began to piece together the fragments of their shared history, finding solace in the knowledge that they had both been victims of the same twisted scheme. Slowly, the walls of mistrust and suspicion began to crumble, replaced by a fragile bond that held the promise of healing and redemption. Talia knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The scars of her past would linger, and the memories would continue to haunt her. But as she looked to the future, she found herself filled with a newfound determination, a resolve to create a life of her own, one where she would never again be defined by the actions of others. In the end, justice had been served, but at what cost? The truth about her adoptive family's secrets would forever be a part of Talia's story, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the depths to which some will go to preserve their own interests. Yet, in the midst of the darkness, a glimmer of hope had emerged, a chance for Talia to reclaim her identity and forge a new path, one that would be guided by her own dreams and desires. Subscribe for more inspiring stories and valuable lessons.